Hello, my dear friends. You're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 20th of December. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important updates are coming from Bakhmut. The battle for Bakhmut continues. The Ukrainians moves more and more reinforcement to this area. The Russian sources reported that during the previous 24 hours they managed to capture or not capture to get into trap the 128th Mounted Assault Brigade, who are very new to this territory. This brigade, some battalions or some forces from this brigade were trying to attack in the triangle between Yakovlevka, Bilogorovka, and Veseloe. Between this triangle, they were trying to start counteroffensive operation or something like this. But as a result of that, those attacks, this brigade had a lot of losses and were forced to step back. If we're talking about Bakhmut itself, I believe that you saw today that the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, visited Bakhmut, and during the day he gave a lot of medals to the Ukrainian forces who stands in Bakhmut and who tries to stop the Russians during the Bakhmut battle. If you remember, if you know, at the same time, somewhere in Kremlin, the president of Russian Federation, Putin, did the same thing. He gave medals to the soldiers. And yesterday, if you know, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, Shoigu, according to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, visited the front line and he inspects the positions and so on. But later, some sources reported that Shoigu was around in 80 kilometers from the front line, but not on the front line. So if we compare these three situations, Zelensky, Shoigu, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, President Putin, we understand that Zelensky was very close to the front line. He was playing with the fire, but I don't think that the Russians want to get him or something like this, because if they wanted, I believe that they had a lot of opportunities and chances to do this. If we're talking about the front lines around Bakhmut, today we got a very interesting update from Klishchevka. The Russians reported that, if you remember, a few days ago we discussed that the Russians managed to take control over the south part of this railroad rocket over this area, and today we got update that the Russians managed to develop their bridgehead on the south and managed to enter the south suburbs of this small town Klishchevka, the first town. So if we turn to the Western sources map and if we update just to understand the better understanding, so the Russians are saying that they control something like this on the north of Klishchevka. So by this small area, they managed to cut the supply and support of Klishchevka from Bakhmut. And according to today's updates, as I understand, from a bridgehead in Andreevka, the Russians managed to enter let's say the south west part of Klishchevka as well. So as you can see, the Russians attacked this town from two sides. There is just one road left that Ukrainians are able to use to supply and support the forces who is located in Klishchevka. But if the Russians manage to enter Klishchevka from the south and from the north, let's call it like this, I believe that in a days this entire town is going to fall, and after that the Russians will be able to open the door and to attack and to split Bakhmut from the mainland by attacking in direction of Ivanovskaya in this area. I'm not saying that this is going to be an easy job. Anyway, this is going to be very difficult, but if the Russians are able to do this, we can start counting days before Bakhmut is going to fall. If we're talking about this front line, the Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours on the area from north of Donetsk, from Avdiivka, New York, Donetsk, and Bakhmut itself, and this triangle where the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade was trapped, the Ukraine lost around 100 soldiers and something around 6 armored vehicles. If we're talking about Kupiansk-Liman front line, the Ukrainians are saying that there is around 5 kilometers left to get inside of Kremenaya. So I believe that at least the governor of LPR are saying that just like 5 kilometers left to enter Kremenaya maybe from the south, maybe from the north, I don't know. But if we are talking about the Russian sources map, we see that The picture here is almost the same, but the Russians are not focused. They are not focused on this situation. They're not described. There are no like panic in their like segment of internet. So maybe they just want to reduce the noise about the situation. Maybe the situation in Crimea is very critical, so that's why they're trying to reduce the pressure on media. Anyway, sooner or later we are going to see the real situation in this town. But for now, we see what we see. And if we're talking about Kupiansk and Liman front line, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours lost around 80 soldiers and something around 8 armored vehicles. On these front lines, the Ukrainians didn't make any attempt of counter-offensive operation, at least according to the Russian sources. But the Russians were attacking the Ukrainians' accumulation of their forces. So the Ukrainians maybe tried to prepare some kind of phase to start offensive operation, but they were spotted by the Russians, and the Russians started artillery attack, and these losses is from just artillery duels and artillery attacks from the Russian side. If we're talking about Donetsk, we got some updates from this area as well. The Russians reported about another progress in Marinka. They reported they managed to develop their bridgehead in Marinka for another 400-500 meters. Yes, 400-500 meters, not kilometers. So I believe that they're very, very close to the western part of Marinka, and I expect that by the end of this year they will be able to take control. So according to information we have, so I believe that the Russians, at least at this moment, control something like this in Marinka, and there is there are 2 blocks left, like the south one and the north one, that may be still under Ukrainian control, but maybe these blocks is already under the Russians. Anyway, we are going to see the next day the progress in this area as well. If we are talking about South Donetsk front line, there were some clashes, there were some attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack Remivka tactical bridgehead, to attack Novodonetsk, to attack Novomikhailivka, Mykolaiv, every single town all over the front line. But during all those attacks were repulsed by the Russians, and the Ukrainians lost around 70 soldiers and something around 5 armored vehicles. So as you can see, the situation is stable. If we're talking about Belarus front, there are no changes, just the regular movements on the front line, just regular trainings and so on. And as you can see, if you take a look at this map, there are no even updates or even icons showing that there are some movements or something like this. The Western source map doesn't show anything as well. As you can see, there are some changes on the, let's say, Chernigov Sumy front line. As you can see, there are like artillery duels and so on, but nothing very important. If we are talking about the Ukrainian military authorities today, the head of, let's say, the head of front of Belarus front reported that there are forces, there are soldiers, Russian soldiers and Belarus soldiers, and he gave some kind of interview, and he was asked if the forces on the territory of Belarus, on the border between Ukraine and Belarus, are able to, let's say, to start offensive operation in the direction of Kiev or Lutsk or Zhytomyr, and to make some problem to the Ukrainian army. And he reported, yes, that there are forces and they are able to complete some tactical, let's say, objectives. So these forces are not able to develop strategic progress to achieve strategic goals, but these forces are able to achieve some tactical goals. Let's say they are able to cut supply between along this railroad. They are able to cut the railroad supply between Kiev and Poland, and they cut this. It's like a tactical goal. It's not a strategic goal, because anyway there are a lot of railroads that Ukrainians are able to use to move. Of course, they will reduce the capabilities of Ukrainian transportation, their logistic, but anyway they will cause some problems, some damage. They will be able to get very close to Kiev and maybe to start attack Kiev as the Ukrainians attacks Donetsk or something like this, but this is not strategic goals. It's just tactical goals that can make the Ukrainian life much worse than they have it right now. Furthermore, today I would like to discuss one more time Bakhmut, because some Russian military experts are saying that as soon as the Russians are able to take Bakhmut, if you remember, we discussed this situation, operations many times, and we discussed that the Russians may attack in direction of Kramatorsk, Slaviansk, that they will try to attack and circle Toretsk, New York agglomeration. But today, some Russian military experts reported that as soon as the Russians are able to take Bakhmut, after Bakhmut, the Russians will try to develop their offensive operation in direction of Chasov Yar. They'll try to take Chasov Yar. After Chasov Yar, the Russians will be concentrated over Konstantinovka. And furthermore, the Russian experts are saying that the Russians are not planning to storm New York to do everything as we discussed, if you remember, to encircle New York from the south, from Verkhney Toretsk in direction of, let's say, Toretsk, or from like some block Druzhba. They're not planning to do this, and as soon as the Russians takes Konstantinovka, then the Russians will try to develop their offensive operation along this road. This is like N32 road, along this road in direction of Pokrovsk. So this is going to be the Russians' movement as soon as they are able to take Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, and Konstantinovka. Furthermore, if we discuss, so of course this is a very interesting attack, but in this case the Russians need to start doing something from the south, and these days we know that the Russians tries to storm Pervomayskoye. At least we can add some kind of arrows trying to describe the movements of the Russians. Another area where the Russians tries to develop their offensive operation is in direction of Kurakhova. So now they're finishing Marinka operation, and don't forget about the Vremivka tactical bridgehead, because there were some clashes and the Russians get as close as possible to this town. If you remember, a few weeks ago there were some updates about possible offensive operation, but then the Russians changed their mind and decided to step back. But anyway, we can draw like strategic arrows, global scope arrows, trying to show the destination. So as you can see, all these arrows are moves in direction of small town by the name of Pokrovsk. This is the town like a heart of Donbas Arc operation, because this is one of the most important logistic center. There are at least two railroads. One of them moves from Dnipro, another one moves from Lazovaya, and one of them from Zaporozhye. From Dnipro there is a highway that moves from Pavlograd. So this is a very important logistics center, and furthermore, by attacking in this direction, the Russians will be able to pass through Toretsk agglomeration, to not just agglomeration, but one of the most powerful fortification, to pass through on the north through Avdiivka fortification, and like they will try to. So the main goal, the main thing that the Russians want to achieve by these three attacks from Bakhmut, Konstantinovka, Pokrovsk, Peski, Pervomayskoye, Pokrovsk, let's say Marinka, Kurakhova, Pokrovsk, and Velika Novoselovka, Kurakhova, Pokrovsk, to meet these three armies. Let's mark this area somewhere in the middle in this area, and by these attacks to establish at least 3 or 4 cauldrons: the Ugledar cauldron, Krasnogorovka cauldron, let's say Avdiivka cauldron, and Toretsk New York agglomeration cauldron. So this is the global scope operation, what the Russians want to achieve. Of course, I believe that to create Seversk cauldron is also like an option, because it's very easy to do. The only thing you need to do is to develop your offensive operation in direction of Slavyansk, and the Seversk forces will be forced to step back immediately, or they will be collapsed or encircled. So this is some kind of global scope about possible movements of the Russians as soon as they are able to take Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, and Konstantinovka. I'm not saying that this is 1 month's operation, but the Russian military experts are saying that with Chasiv Yar, it is much more easier to take Chasiv Yar than Bakhmut. I'm not agree with this, because if you attack Bakhmut, at least there are no barriers. There was just, let's say, 2 barriers. It was like Road of Life, road rocket. There was some kind of MO3 road rocket, and let's say this Kennel rockets, and that's it. So most of these rockets was crossed by the Russians very long time ago. But if we're talking about Chasiv Yar, there is a railroad rocket, and the previous experience of the special operation says that railroad rocket is one of the most difficult rocket to cross. Sometimes I get the feeling that it's more difficult to cross than the river rocket, because we saw a lot of updates, a lot of battles along the railroad rocket, and it was very difficult for the Ukrainians and for the Russians as well to cross. So as you can see, according to this disposition, it will be very difficult to attack Chasiv Yar from the north because of, like, let's say, natural or industrial barrier as a railroad rocket. the possible attack I see just from the south, but in this area, these fields are completely mined. There are a lot of Ukrainians. So to tell the truth, this plan from the Russians looks very good on the map, but if we start to analyze this plan, I see a lot of negative sides of this plan. At least maybe the Russians will try to draw some kind of like strategic plan to move in direction of Pokrovsk, because anyway, sooner or later, if the Russians plans to continue this offensive operation, we will meet in Pokrovsk, but not in the next months, maybe somewhere in the summer or even in the autumn. I can't tell exactly. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel. Put your likes to my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.